We'll move on to the plenary panel session on national education policy beyond foundational literacy and numeracy, bridging school and higher education to make multidisciplinary education a reality. So please join me in welcoming on stage our panelists, no stage, but to this area, our panelists, Professor Shivkumar Jolad from Flame University, Ms. Rashmi Shukla Sharma, Senior Visiting Fellow at ICRIER, and Mr. Janak Nabar, STIR Pune. And the session will be moderated by Mr. Makin. I'll take the liberty of introducing our speakers while we are setting this place up. Ms. Rashmi Shukla Sharma is a former Indian Administrative Service Officer, an alumnus of Delhi and Princeton universities, from where she received her M.Phil and in psychology and a master's degree in public administration. In the course of her service, she acquired in-depth knowledge and experience in school education and local government. She is the author of the Elementary Education System in India, a field-based investigation of institutional structures, processes, and dynamics, local government in India, policy and practice. She is a prolific writer and public intellectual on governance and public policy matters. She is also a board member of TRIF, Transforming Rural India Foundation. Thank you, ma'am. I hope it's accurate. Professor Shivkumar Jolad is an associate professor at Flame University. He studies the structural challenges faced by government schools and examines ways to reorganize the school system for better functionality. He received his PhD in theoretical condensed matter physics and doctoral minor in demography from Pennsylvania State University. I think that got a lot of raised eyebrows, Dr. Jolad. Very interesting intersection of the two fields. Dr. Jolad is one of the co-authors of Ahmedabad District Human Development Report, which was released in 2016. He has worked with several NGOs such as Akshara Foundation, Pratham People's Health Movement, and AID India on projects related to public health and elementary education. Mr. Janak Nabar is the CEO of the Center for Technology, Innovation and Economic Research, and has been leading STIR, as they call it, STIR's research efforts. He is a member of the CII National Committee on Technology and the Expert Group on Technology, and has been part of working groups constituted by Niti Aayog. Mr. Nabar has worked for 2 years with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Serbia, where he focused on the performance and financial monitoring of UNHCR's NGO partners. Janak holds an MSc from the London School of Economics and Political Science, MA Mathematics from Balliol College, University of Oxford, where he was a Radhakrishnan scholar. And Makin, we've already heard about. So over to you, Makin. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And welcome to my panel. Good to see you. I'm seeing all of them for the first time. It's somewhat awkward to be moderating a panel where we've not had a chance to interact. So maybe to bridge that gap a little bit. And I know we have an hour, and there were conversations that we could have triggered even in the previous session. So I'd want to keep enough time for the audience. But let's start off with, it's a provocative topic, NEP beyond FLN, right? And specifically in terms of what happens in school versus what may be needed for reality, for life. So with that backdrop in mind, I'd love to invite opening remarks from each of you about what are your stance, or what are your largest positions on what should be happening through the national education policy or in general in secondary and higher education that today is possibly not getting enough attention. And I'd love to start with Rashmi ma'am. Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thank you.
So just by way of background, my focus is more on, and I'll be talking a little later on the national innovation system. So clearly higher education plays a very critical role in that. In the NEP, and more recently you would have seen there was an announcement for the National Research Foundation bill which was passed. And I think that's something which is very much needed because bulk of research that currently happens does not happen in our higher education sector in terms of the funding, the performance. In terms of output, you clearly have a lot more output coming out of higher education. And one of the goals, I think, of making sure there's more funding available for higher education is not just for the purpose of research, which leads to more publications, but I think the students who could benefit by working alongside these researchers. So I think that's something which is very critical. And then, obviously, if you drill it down to school education, what would it take to really prepare students with that mindset of inquiry? And there are other announcements that have also come through. We have a lot of public research facilities, educational institutions, which should be accessible to even students in school level. So I think the bill that's recently passed on funding is something which is very critical for me.
Okay.
We'll discuss that a lot more in terms of how the merits of how it should be administered.
Hi. I think one of the main things that NEP brought about, I think it has been talked about even in the earlier education policies also, to bring this bridge between this vocational education and the mainstream education. And we see that everywhere, whenever we look at any occupation, we have a gap between the people who work with their mind and people who work with their hands. And that is largely to do with our own education structure, where people who pursue this mainstream education, they totally dismiss the vocational education. This is in contrast to other countries like China, Germany, and even US, where vocational education and even vocational courses are part of your own mainstream education. So, I think we need to go back to some of the roots and also the reasons behind why we see such a gap and how our NEP can actually address these things. Another thing is also, NEP also talks about is bridging the boundaries between disciplinaries. We borrowed our own education system from the colonial masters. That time, like post-independence, Nehruvian era, all that we built was we separated education by levels, undergraduate from postgraduate, and from research institutions. We built hundreds of them, and they were disconnected at levels and disconnected at different subject levels. That's why we have all these independent colleges in art, science, commerce, engineering, medicine, law, but you don't see them talking to each other. We have different regulatory bodies for all of these, but we can't see them in an interdisciplinary manner. For example, a medical school can't have a biomedical engineering department because engineering is not linked to this. A law school cannot, they don't have core faculty in sociology, sociology, economics, and other disciplines, which are very essential to understand the state and the nation. I think with this,
Thanks. Okay, so let me begin by telling everyone that organizers have made a great mistake by putting me on this panel, because I object, first of all, to the topic of it, which is ignoring, getting beyond literacy. Okay. So I don't think we are anywhere beyond literacy and numeracy. And in fact, I'd like to connect literacy and numeracy to the topic that we have. While they have made a mistake, but I admit that their concerns are valid. And I'm all for interdisciplinary work both at the secondary level and at the higher education level. And I leave it to better minds than myself to think of how it's going to be done, what it should be. So I'll come down to the kind of fundamentals that I am. So when you're talking about interdisciplinary, I think be very aware that our secondary schools, we recently did a study in Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan, and I'll show you in the next session. I will come to some of that. That many of the students come are not even equivalent to class 5 by the time they come to class 9. So nowhere, so somewhere, instead of going beyond basic numeracy and literacy, we have to think of basic numeracy and literacy with multidisciplinary. So we have to understand that we are talking of, I mean, we are talking in a context where people are not getting an education period, whether it's multidisciplinary. People are coming to class 9, and I had come, and Tochna was also at some point. So they had done the work at the grassroots and found that class 9 students were not, most of them were not even near class 5. So the one, you cannot talk about secondary education without quality, because we may have a much larger number of students near universal elementary, but we have students, and there are, which I'll come to, very core institutional problems. I mean, these are so basic that people would be stunned. Okay, so these are, I'll come to it in my next session, and these exist at the state level, they exist at the district, I mean, they exist across. And we basically don't have an academic support structure at all for secondary. The details, whoever is interested. So I just want to put this on the table, that this is the scenario in which.
Okay. No, thank you. First, I'm just, on one end, I'm just joyous about the diverse views of this group. And as a listener, I'm thrilled. As a moderator, I'm like, how do I moderate this man? Like, what do I do next? So please forgive me. I will try and do my best. And I think, at least my own, and disclaimer, I end up working in secondary education. So one of the reasons why I found the panel title maybe slightly relevant to the times is not the reality that Asar has been telling us for 18 years now, that more than 50% of our grade 5 kids cannot do grade 2 math and language, right? It's been 18 years, 2005 was the first Asar report. The numbers have not changed, right? So the reality that you're talking about, ma'am, is clear. The difference is that now we have a mission around FLN, right? Now the realization, and possibly hence what might follow in terms of doing. So we know that this is a problem, we've acknowledged it as a problem, and we intend to do stuff.
Much before
No, absolutely, ma'am. It's like, at least now we have put a stake in the ground as a nation that, okay, this is a mission. And when I also look at the sector, right, that both in terms of funding, as well as in terms of number of organizations and initiatives in the space, and finally, and probably most importantly, in terms of just measurement of what should be the output of primary education, right, is reasonably well articulated, right? When you think about secondary education, that what should an 18-year-old be able to do, right? What should an 18-year-old know, right? For those questions, our closest proxy are our 10th and 12th board exams, which I feel I don't have to try and make a case for how poor a proxy they are, right? So I feel these are, and the intention probably isn't that, hey, one problem is bigger than the other. I feel that on the latter problem, in the secondary education, we've probably not even started characterizing the problem. That what is this space? What should be happening? What should the outcomes be? Are there enough people experimenting and trying things? So I wasn't part of the organizing team, but I'm assuming that that may have been the intention. That may have been the intention of why this panel may be important. But okay, back to the panel, right? I think like amazing diverse inputs on importance of research, on vocational education, right, and what it means, and as well as like on hey, how do we think of this together, right, versus think of these as alternatives. So yeah, I think my next question is to build on maybe question to Shiv, right? That NCF 2005 talked about vocationalization, like talked about doing, etc. And in some sense, just like we've known about the FLN challenges, we've known that hey, our secondary education needs to be a lot more doing led, right? But that hasn't happened. You go to an ITI when you don't get admitted into a college, right? That is the reality of like, अच्छा कहीं तो भेजना है बच्चे को, college में नहीं हुआ, ITI में डाल देते हैं, right? So that continues to be the reality. So my question to you, Shiv, is what do you think needs to change or is different this time that makes you think and believe that hey, this time our learning or our learners' learnings will be a lot more doing led, or vocationalization would probably happen a lot more.
Frankly, NEP has a very grand ambition that within 5 years they are going to have 50% of the people having at least one vocational skill. Okay, that is too grand because this problem, as you said, has been there for almost 100 years. Wood About Committee report in 1937 talked about it. Sargent Committee report. And even before that, Gandhi himself in his basic education, Nahi Talim, he strongly emphasized integrating vocational education with the mainstream education. So the broader question is, why have we still failed after hundreds of years in this? So one thing that is commonly stated is our social structure. So the caste system, as Ambedkar said, it is the division of laborers, not the labor. So in that way, when we divide the labor, like you always separate between manual work and the mental work. And that's why when institutions were set up, let's say industrial training institutes or diploma institutes, it is always those who couldn't get through the mainstream, they used to fall back on the this one, like manual work. Okay? So the class and the caste strongly intersect with it. We will, it is like, we will know it. Vocational education is for the people of others. So the othering is always there, and it has continued over the years. So we know it is very hard to change the social structure. It is slowly changing, but I don't think it can change as fast as the NEP envisions. But if you think of the other way, like NCF 2000 and 2005 said that, okay, we will not separate vocational from the mainstream, we will try to integrate them. That means in the regular secondary education itself, we will have vocational education being part of it. We will have vocational courses integrated into it. Okay. So if you go back, okay, it's a great idea, but do we have the schooling structure supporting it? If you actually look at our schooling structure, like we have separated across level, especially the public schooling system, you have primary, upper primary. The government's responsibility was only up to the elementary education. Very few secondary schools can be seen in India. So there is a big gap. So if you look at the integrated schools, like schools with grades from 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, it's always private. Private believed in this vertical integration, government believed in the segregation, like splitting of the levels. So now we don't have this vertical integration, and we have the secondary schools where government is struggling to find even subject-wise teachers like math, science, whatever. And now bringing vocational education requires augmenting your capacity a lot. And also vocational education is more costlier than the mainstream because you need a lot of trained people, a lot of equipment and other things. Even if you want to build modern soft skills kind of things, that also need trained personnel. So given the scarcity of the teachers, scarcity of the schooling infrastructure itself, public infrastructure especially, so the very question of integrating vocational education into mainstream would be very hard challenge. Especially given that, okay, if you look at the post-2020, they announced the national education policy, but there has not been additional budgetary support to this. You have grand ambitions, you don't provide with additional funding or even a roadmap for implementation. So I think these are the main two challenges. There are many other things. For example, even if you have vocational education being integrated, how will you evaluate? If all our higher education system is dependent on the entrance exams, which do not test these skills, who is going to send? Okay, you will have your subject in the class, but just like we neglect our art and sports, even vocational courses will also be neglected. So assessment is also another third thing. But before that, we have much major problems. One is the social structure, other is the school structure.
Would you like to add? Go ahead, please.
Sorry. No, just clearly the lack of trainers and teachers is a major problem. But just thinking about what you were saying earlier, also, integrating the AI, like just understanding the biases that come into AI or the use of AI as a not artificial intelligence but intelligence assisting way of doing things. The other thing is yesterday Karthik Muralidharan actually spoke about just broadening the definition of skills. I think that's very, very relevant because through hands-on experiences, it's also about just questioning things, right? So the government I know is funding a lot of these Atal Innovation the incubators in schools, in labs. Now, as you mentioned earlier, the kids are learning way ahead of like many of us. Just giving them time to experiment and tinker with these things. I think it's also sort of bringing about that kind of change in mindset in working with things and new materials, and which have implications for the kind of research and work they potentially could do later. So,
Correct. Ma'am, would invite your views on your.
You don't want me to speak.
Of course, I want you to speak. No, I actually want you to speak a lot, and I'm looking forward to your session.
No,
but
I'm sorry, I'm playing the spoiler.
अरे no, this is fun. मतलब सब एक चीज बोलेंगे तो उसमें क्या मजा है? Yes. तो your opinion on the root causes or the causes for the current state we find ourselves in, right? Both in terms of the secondary and higher education, like, hey, why are we where we are? And would love thoughts, inputs on.
In fact, my next presentation is exactly on
perfect.
why we are
So
in
then,
secondary education. But I will, since it's not this session, I don't want to go this. So I will say, see, some of the mistakes that we are making is, one is we believe that constant measurement will get us somewhere. And we have seen for past several years, we have done there's non-stop measurement. And I don't think we are any different. Okay, so we have to start looking at the root causes. And these, in my view, lie a great deal in our institutional structure and function. Okay, and that exists at the national level, the state level, the grassroots. Now, there are very deep fault lines here, which I'll studied. In fact, my main work is on public institutions. Some themes repeat across various kinds. But anyway, so there are very, very deep problems in our institutional structure, which will not let us move forward until we address them. Okay, and as you say, like even if in a school, how prepared is a school for vocational education? Okay, vocational education is outsourced. Okay. So then you have all kinds of, various qualities, because we don't think it's important enough to, sort of build it as part of this. It's largely outsourced. So you have very varied quality in vocational education. Second, whenever we outsource, like a lot of the times, we think that outsourcing is going to solve the problems. But when you have a system where there is a lot of rents, outsourcing actually makes things, because you can make money. There have been books about it. You can make money outsource, and then you're not even responsible. So you don't even have to answer for what is going on. So what we have been doing is that, similarly, but technology. The way we have been using technology in government is atrocious. and it has magnified all the problems that we have in government, made things more centralized. People are forever in video conferences, non-stop. Every state I go to, every sector I look at, one thing is common, that field level workers, instead of doing their work, are non-stop attending
Zoom calls.
this kind of centralized tendency has got worse. So what I'm saying is that yet we are so gung-ho about technology, like magic
Yeah.
these days. Like people talk of magic, talk, oh, we will use technology and
No,
they
even more, right? Technology is good.
good and
Matlab, it's
yeah.
not to be questioned.
Yeah.
That is technology good?
Yeah.
Is we are beyond that question. Technology is good.
How we are. So my take is that there are very deep fault lines, like vocational education. What is the system we have of supporting quality of educational or vocational education in negligible? I mean, you look at those state institutes of vocational education, it's all very sorry. So there are very deep institutional faults, and we have neither studied them nor have we kind of talked about them, nor neither policymakers nor academics have paid them enough attention. And we go on sort of jumping from one solution to another, which someone hands us. Someone says, okay, you start measuring. Someone says, okay, you start doing technology. There is a reason why we jump also. So we do that and we make things worse. So I think that is why it's very difficult to move forward in almost any direction. That's my.
Oh, thank you. And again, I'm now torn between asking you follow-up questions because you are also going to cover some of this. So I'll try and steer conversation in a slightly different direction, right? Around, how could, so one of the larger aspects or the reasons where secondary education and higher education are a lot closer to learners leaving education. Right? Our gross enrollment ratio in college is 27%. So 73% of our kids leave education in the school system. Right? Broadly about 30% or around, approximately 30% in the 10th, 30% after 12th. Right? And if we think about what have we as educators and enablers of the system enabled or created for the kids who are leaving after 10th or before 10th or after 12th. And more importantly, what could we do so that this education not just becomes relevant, say, today, right, but finds a way to stay relevant? So thoughts on either of these questions. So like, hey, how do we serve the learners who are unable to complete college education, right? Which is at least 3/4 of our learners, right? Which is a massive bulk of our learners. How do we serve that bulk? And second, in serving them meaningfully, how do we build systems that are adaptive, that can stay relevant as we go? Any thoughts on these?
Yeah, so this question I think once Vimla madam also asked. So is schooling actually preparing the children to face the real world? So as you said, 3/4 of the students actually exit after school. So only 1/4, the people like us, we think that the education continues till undergraduate or the master education, but much of India is not in that. It's not only in India, like even in US, the higher education enrollment is around 50 to 60%. So that means even there, around 30 to 40% people are still exiting the, after school they have to enter the workforce. But is the schooling actually preparing? But my thoughts are like, if you look at our own evaluation system in the 10th board and the 12th board, which you already talked about, so they do not assess any of the relevant skills for the real world. So even for IIT, if you actually think about it, I started in IIT, all that the students actually learned are the basic 3 subjects like physics, chemistry, and math, as if that is the only thing that is required for the things. When they're trying to build anything for the world, like, they don't have any understanding of the social structures, because engineering is supposed to serve the society, right? But they are so much ingrained in their pure, like natural science bent, that they don't understand the social context and they start proposing very technical solutions to social problems which may not address. So this is one of them. But other things, as you said, talk about the skill. If I look at the people who come to Flame University, when we interview them, so I see them that they have already heard about very fancy topics like digital marketing, which I had no idea what those things are, like different type of communication, all the things. Maybe in my childhood, like I never heard those terms. Now this IB board, international boards, they try to certify them in all these skills. But on the other hand, we also get certain scholarship students, who come from state board or the CBSE board. Like, for them, it is the standard art, science, commerce stream. For them, they are not aware of like, multiple soft skills that are actually needed in the real world. So their own communication skills suffer. So I see a clear difference. Although they may be good in the subject, when we are interviewing them, they are not able to articulate it better. So they fall behind. So much of our large public education system within India, like, are failing them in this soft skills, and that makes them fail at a later stage. And regarding the hard skills, anyway, we have not considered in our formal system at all. We don't even get to interview those people because we always push them to the borders.
Yeah.
They work in ITA, they go to ITIs or diploma, polytechnic schools or home science things, and they don't enter the mainstream.
Janak, would you like to add?
So I work mainly with undergrads and master students to sort of, involve them in the kind of work that we do. But I think for school students, I mean, one of the things, this is just something which, again, is general reading, and many of you may probably have more experience in this. I think the role of like mentors, if we can somehow use like retired academics, retired scientists who can actually mentor these students, right? And there's studies in the US which have shown, like, just, you probably know the study better, that, just interacting with like Nobel laureates in areas where it's low income students, just the opportunities and knowing the possibilities, I think have resulted in sort of, at least them attaining a certain level of school education. And so just having that kind of role model, if all of us here, like through philanthropy also, can encourage. I mean, I know organizations that are doing that, at the undergrad level and master's level. But I think as individuals, we have that capability, and the time that, I mean, nothing will compare to that, right? Just spending time and mentoring people. So I think that's something which I would really push for. Yeah.
So I would like to add to this. Like some of the higher education institutions, I taught at this IIT Gandhinagar. So we used to have an outreach program for the school children. So that's the first time they would have ever seen an IIT, and then, very fascinated by it. They would see the labs, they would see the faculty, and when we are very friendly with them, they are really settled. My school teacher is always so hierarchical. How come these teachers are not talking so freely with us? Along with it, there is also large-scale outreach programs like Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, which yesterday Professor Milind Sohani actually talked about it. So they could reach out to the society at large and the school children at large. So that kind of builds an aspiration, just like you talked about Nobel laureates. Even talking to reputed higher education institutions can also inspire them. And massive programs, for example, there is Center for Creative Learning at IIT Gandhinagar, where they have reached out to almost all the schools in Gujarat. So they have an outreach program. They train the teachers regarding science and math education, and with a lot of innovative models, and all the YouTube videos have been put up. So at least I used to see the kids and the teachers actually getting very inspired by this initiative. I think that role at least we can take up. So although higher education is around 40,000 colleges versus 1.5 million schools, so the scale is different, but we have to reach this scale one or the other.
No, I don't. I feel like, again, by probing the question, I will get you to talk more about what you're going to present. So I'll actually now want to open up to the audience and get questions from the audience for any of the panel members. Yes.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to have had higher education in in the US a couple of decades ago, and I think what I've realized is there is a deep connect, and there are issues at the lower elementary school and in schools in India. I realize that, and I don't know what the solutions for that would be. But what happens in the US education system is that the universities are deeply connected with programs for the higher secondary. So high school in the US starts and goes from 9 to 12. So children who are in those 4 years, if they are tuning in to go into certain universities, the universities play a very close knit role with the high schools, and so a lot of children go on and take these pre-college level courses during those high school years. So that makes the easier to get into certain universities, whatever they're aiming for. And even if they don't, their knowledge is definitely improved along the way by the time they finish high school. Similarly, industry plays a very large role in universities there. So again, there is, it's a cascading setup where university. So I had a lot of my professors who were working, full time in their jobs, but then evening classes or weekend classes, they would come into the universities and give lecture. So there is a flow of connectivity. So by the time you finish high school, you're already like one half a foot or 1 foot in college. By the time you're done with university, which is a higher, master's levels or undergrad levels, excuse me, you already know, how the real world is out there. And I've always wondered why we can't have universities like, for instance, Flame, go in and start, maybe not, university, and I don't know, it's probably not, it's easier said than done, but is there a way that some university like yours could maybe start working in high schools, at least in the Pune region, right? And see if you can maybe generate that interest in some kids. Obviously, not all kids are going to be able to handle it, but can we not have a system and work towards that? That's
Right.
just something.
So fantastic point. But may I broaden the question from Flame doing it to universities in India doing it? Right? Like I feel like there are, and the response could easily be that Flame already does it and or does parts of it, etc. But what would it take for a large number of universities in India to start doing it? So if any of you would like to take that.
Yeah. Roughly comparing the structure of US education and Indian education, the scale is very different. So US, all over US you have 100,000 schools. India has 1.5 million schools. We are scattered over. US schooling system is like you have a school districts, so in which all kids in the school districts actually come and study over there. So we have one school in almost every habitation in India. So like every village, even just around the 1,000 or 2,000 population, you will have one or two schools over there. So schooling is extremely diffused. So US maybe around 1,000 universities have to serve around 100,000 schools. In India, like we have 1,000 universities serving 1.5 million schools. That too, they are scattered. So this is a structural constraint that I am talking about. And even in India, like universities are not as big as the US. As I studied, we had around 45,000 in one campus. Like the scale is huge. In India, like 3,000, university campuses can accommodate 3,000. That is considered as a big. So in that way, the scale between these two are very different. Same with China. So China is also very much like US. In spite of having same population as India, they have 500,000 schools, like 1/3 of us. So this poses some constraints, but per student expenditure is also very different. But what you suggest is definitely doable, at least in the cities. So that is where all the universities are there. Some of them have an outreach program. At least even Flame also has an outreach program. Like we also send our students out in our different experiential learning programs. But it will do really good if it is integrated as part of the curriculum. When I used to train the students in IIT, they say that, okay, if there is no grade that is attached to your experiences with the school, their commitment level drops down. Okay. So yesterday even Milind Soni was telling the same thing. Okay. So unless our own subjects, let's say if I take sociology, I have to ensure that, the students actually go and understand the caste structure, because else becomes too theoretical. In that way, at least, you try to integrate with the society, schooling at large. But if you just say that, okay, it is just your outreach program, then it is taken as a hobby. Like only few selected students will actually take it, and then rest will. And that's been largely my experience.
Ankur and then.
So, I'm actually going to pose a question for you, Mekin. But
Nice.
before that, I mean, I think, this, in going back to the AI discussion, I think it's a big fantasy that we live in, that education in India is about productivity. And, it's not. And that's why I don't think AI is going to disrupt us much. Education in India is essentially about sorting, selection, differentiation. And hey, when only, 5% of India can speak English, we don't even have to work a whole hard, to even sort and select, right? And so, and then you add the caste system and all of that, and we are a pretty sorted society that way, right? And nobody with the power and the ability to change things is going to bother changing this. And that's the reason why education system is sort of, what, as you said, we've known this for maybe 23 years, we've known this longer, nothing changes. But now, and why I say we don't care about productivity is because the biggest, you would expect in some ways the biggest, the stakeholder, the one with the skin in the game, the industry. When is the last time you've had industry get after this issue of education? We hear these, conversations about, hey, all our engineers are unemployable, blah, 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 CSR. But if anybody should be concerned about it, it should be industry. We talk about skills. You talked about other countries. All these countries, their skills system is in sense driven by industry. What does industry do as far as India is concerned, as far as skills is concerned? And so you're an exception, and you have to leave industry in some ways to work on this. So my question to you, Mekin, is why doesn't industry do more on this?
And I think the answer is very similar to what Shiv started out with, right? That at scale, it just feels like too daunting a problem to take on. You rather solve it in your private setup, right? So Infosys will set up a Mysore campus that can train 100,000 students, right? 100,000 fresher engineers. So hires engineers, but then puts them through a 9-month training program so that they can be productive at Infosys, right? So it's running its own education, and it's happy to do its own education, right? Urban Company, one of the companies I know reasonably well, does the same. Like, as in they are training 70% of their workforce, right? And spending like all of that time and energy. And they have tried partnering with the NSDC. They have tried partnering with the ITIs, and they've just not been able to make things happen, right? I'll give you one. I'll end with a positive example of where I have seen industry and skilling actually work together. Is in Tamil Nadu, where a large number of ITIs got privatized, right? And now you have this beautiful setup or nexus of someone who owns an auto ancillary factory, right? And Tamil Nadu also happens to be the one state where manufacturing did take off, especially in the automotive space. So it also owns an ITI, right? Now what that does is that the ITI student is almost, like if they do well, they're almost guaranteed a job. Like they will get to work. The course in the ITI is relevant to what is needed in this factory. As in, the reason I also posed the question of it being a nexus is that this is narrow. This is limiting on the learner's capability, right? That, hey, from a learner's potential, it's like, okay, it's at least pipelining that you'll get to somewhere, but it's not necessarily providing them a platform of what their future could be. But that said, this is one example where, like, if you leave it to the industry, this is how it works. I was on a sector skill council. NSDC was meant to be industry-led, right? National Skill Development corporation, like we had sector skill councils. All of those sector skill councils had industries driving what should we expect. And if you review that one, you had software engineering courses as part of NSDC. I'm like, when Infosys and TCS are already doing it, why does government need to subsidize software engineering courses for NSDC? But even worse, right? That they were a lot more specific to what this company wants. Who is the person who is sitting on the NSDC committee? Which company are they part of? And if they are part of, say, a telecom company, then the software engineering there is expected to be more telecom oriented versus being more foundational and like being about like, hey, what should the learner learn? So, like this is the view, or these are just my experiences of where I've seen industry and the skilling ecosystems interface. And yes, they don't present a pretty picture, right? I feel like if there could be methods, and we have tried with NSDC, we tried like let's pull in industry, and it hasn't worked. I feel we need more experiments. I feel we need more efforts on what will actually make this work, because it is a challenge for urban company or for Infosys. They spend a lot of money on this, which is from their bottom line. They would be much happier to not spend that money and create profits for their stakeholders if they could. So if they got trained, the word itself causes challenges, but yes. But thank you for the question. Yes. Maybe the last, I got a 5-minute markup. Mike, yeah.
This higher education partnership, look, we already have a model in the form of HSTP, right? But then that was a movement. That was in the form of HSTP and Zakia and John would be able to speak more about that. Hoshangabad Science and Teaching Program. But the Madhya Pradesh government stopped that program, right? They just killed it. Yeah. Yes. So we do have an indigenous model which we can rethink about. And that's, in fact, the second point is related to that Ankur's point in terms of skill, and so whether the industry has a demand for, is there a curriculum and employment gap? Whether there is a demand from the industry of the skills that we are producing. But then you have to understand from an educationist's point of view, I would say that, and there has been some criticisms that and this happens even in the US, that if we are talking about a pipeline, then the educationists would say that the private companies are dictating the curriculum of the schooling, which should not be there. So then, we've already had this discussion in the 1960s, 1970s, that there should be a division between employment and education and not an alignment. So whether we need to rethink about that no, there needs to be some kind of an alignment with the participation of private companies, and in terms of demand generation, how do we deal with this problem of private companies dictating school curriculum in that case? Yeah.
Would invite viewers. Any thoughts or responses to them? Can you pass the mic?
Somewhere, my comment is a bit we are talking two levels in this country. One, we talk about education, who are going to be educated, where you all are making contributions out. And then there is the other level who's not really going to. So when we are having this conversation about those who are going to, I think one has to keep referring back to those who are not going to be educated and see what it means there, and whether it can include them in some. I don't know how, but I just feel that it's almost two separate conversations that go on. The one hand, you're talking about people who do get an education, other, but how, when you're talking here, how do you kind of somehow these
connect
guys?
Yes, yeah. Please.
Just to, Ankur, you're right, like industry does not spend enough, and that's the subject of my next transforming public research, but it's more about how the government spends on research and where that research is performed, right? The institutions that we have in India, which are autonomous R&D institutes, are completely cut off from higher education. So there's a beautiful quote in Naushad Forbes' book, Struggle and the Promise, where he says that, Stanford, which actually gets a lot of public funding, even though they produce a lot of great, innovate. The quote is that if you were to look at the publications from Stanford and, if the world didn't have those, the world would probably be marginally worse off. But if you look at the students who've come out of Stanford, and that's largely because it's a research and teaching institute, the world would be far worse off. So I think what Rashmi ji also said earlier about institutions and the structural impediments that are there, about how funding happens, where it happens, who performs that research. In the US, a lot of public research, whether it's defense, health, enormous amounts get spent in the higher education sector. And that's something which, hence this idea of like broadening the definition of skills, I think is very, very important. That, what kind of skills do we want the students to have, and how do we change those? Is it just education skills, or the industry ready skills, or is it just that ability to think and adapt? So.
We have one last question from there.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Okay. The system is hopefully able to hear you through that mic.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll be quick. So I'm from Antarang Foundation. We primarily work in the field of career guidance and with this age group that we're discussing. So one question with respect to the problem statement, Mekin, that you mentioned in the beginning. We are really struggling with defining what the outcome and problem is for secondary education and higher secondary, where students are going. So with regards to that, I would ask the panel, it's an indicator which is the EET, which is, enrollment into education, employment and training. And now it's almost triple ET, adding entrepreneurship to it. That's something that we are trying to track, like post 10, post 12. Are students at least trying to get into either EE or T? So I wanted to hear the thoughts of the panel on how effective do you think indicator like this would be to be our anchor towards seeing where the students are going? And if in your discussions with the academicians, policymakers, are they looking at any similar indicator, or is there any proxy indicator which can help us anchor on the outcome of secondary education for the students? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I can start and please add. Yeah. So I think firstly, I'm glad that you're attempting this, right? That there aren't longitudinal, or there aren't even basic measures besides GER that today exist, right? And definitely none that go on beyond education. Like I was actually reasonably impressed by this platform called collegescorecard.ed.gov, which the US government created, which is able to provide for every college and course 3 data points. 1, what is the fees? 2, what is the median salary after, I think, 2 years? Right? If you take this course, this is the median salary after 2 years. And 3rd, what is the completion rate? Because the median completion rate is 50% in the US, right? So, and their intention was that, hey, this could help solve or at least reduce the $1 trillion education debt problem, because students take large amounts of loan with no visibility to how they're going to repay it. But it's a method of building accountability towards the education system, right? What is working, what is not. Are these the best metrics? Probably not. There may be and could and should probably be better metrics. But I am glad that somebody is at least thinking about, hey, what happens to our learners after education, right? And starts to hold ourselves accountable for, did we do a good job? And if we did not, can we please learn, right? Our education system does not learn. It's designed to not learn. It's like, hey, we will just do this, and we will not be held accountable, is where we are. So I'm glad that you're attempting this. There are a small group of organizations which have tried to come up with something like an Asar for youth, very, very early days. it has in its ingredients questions like, have you traveled independently from one place to another? Right? That as an ability to travel independently from one place to another is possibly a ability that will enable a young person to do many more things. Right? So what are the foundational set of abilities that if learners possess, they could probably build on and do more, is what that project is trying to do. I think it's at least 2, maybe 3 years away from seeing decent pilots. But those are the ones that I am aware of. Anybody else? Please, please.
Spoiler, but what I would say is that I hope you're also doing, before you develop indicators, a lot of qualitative studies. Okay? Because I think what we end up doing in India at least is that we develop indicators without fully understanding the ground. So it's this problem between being roughly right, qualitative work, and precisely wrong by measuring without understanding the full scenario. And also, I would say that while indicators and things add, but let's be very clear that they are not a solution. Okay? And they don't even necessarily lead you to solutions. Because you may know, like learning levels, that this is how it is, but it doesn't lead us to solutions. For that, I think you need different kinds of investment. So that's the only suggestion I wanted to make. And I also wanted to say that before you develop an indicator, I hope you will be able to do a lot of qualitative work. Because how that indicator is developed, that you don't want to be precisely wrong.
On that beautiful note, where I strongly agree with half of what ma'am said and strongly disagree with the other half of what ma'am said. I feel this has been a fantastic panel. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing in the diversity. I no, I totally enjoyed doing this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of
Thank you,
all the
everyone.
panels, this one had the maximum laughter, discussion, applause. So I think the organizers made a very good mistake by having these conflicting views in the panel. I'm sure everyone will agree with me. I request the panelists to please wait back. And Dr. Gulam Karga, if you could please felicitate the panelists and the moderator.